Kathleen Rowling, English novelist, most notably known for writing the beloved Harry Potter series, and as of recent months, probably most infamously known for being a TERF. Now, Joanne and her colleagues will have you believe that TERF is some kind of derogatory word against women, and perhaps you could argue that. But as for now, we don't have a less colloquial way of identifying the views held by Rowling and her contemporaries. TERF, meaning trans-exclusive radical feminist, is a colloquialism coined to refer to feminists who can be men or women, who have otherwise very progressive feminist views for the most part, except for one area, that being issues surrounding the transgender population. Some TERFs will argue that by a trans woman identifying as a woman, it disregards the experiences of cis women, which is something I think Rowling has gone on record saying. Some will even say that trans men are traitors to womanhood because they don't identify as women, despite being assigned female at birth. All of these arguments can be easily debunked and have been numerous times. In fact, I'll link some videos that go into greater detail about this in the description. We're not actually here to talk about TERFism per se, but rather about Rowling and about Harry Potter. In this video, I'll quickly go over some of Rowling's points and how this has affected fans of her famous book series. Chapter 1. Rowling's Radical Rhetoric. In no particular order, here are some of Rowling's most infamous tweets that have been heavily criticised, and rightfully so. Let's break them down line by line. If sex isn't real, there is no same-sex attraction. You may be wondering, what is this implying? And what does this have to do with transgender people? Well, the statement, if sex is real, ellipses, is meant to be some kind of gotcha to people who think transgender people exist and that transgender identity is valid. There seems to be some kind of consensus amongst Rowling and her colleagues that people who believe in the science that supports transgender identity are somehow science deniers who don't believe in sex. Funny how, in short, all this means is that people who believe in science don't believe in science because I don't accept the science they believe in, and I accept my own fictional science that I made up instead. In case you're not aware of any scientific research or studies surrounding the validity of trans people, I invite you to click the first link in the description that will take you to a list of credible sources which will offer you insight into real research and their outcome, as opposed to claims made by Rowling that cite no sources and so forth. So in addressing Rowling, I must conclude that, no, I am not a science denier. Yes, I believe sex is real, and yes, I believe in same-sex attraction. But I would just call that being gay, because I don't have to use big words to sound academic. Smart people sound smart without trying, Joanne. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. Taking this at face value, I agree. If there was no such thing as sex, human beings would have developed without sex, and then we would be asexual and would reproduce by dropping off a limb or something, which would grow into a child. And then in that case, no, the lived experiences of women would be erased, because there never would have been any women. But that's not what Joanne is saying. This isn't a listen to Joanne say sentences that are blatantly obvious to anyone who took Year 4 science. This is a dog whistle. This is a more palatable way of saying, if we let trans women identify as women, then, for reasons unbeknownst, I find that offensive, because I don't believe trans women are real women. And now, I don't believe trans women aren't real women doesn't mean I don't believe trans women are cis women, because no, nobody believes that fundamentally. It rather means I believe trans women are men, which, guess what kids, is transphobic. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. Let me rephrase this. By getting rid of that first part about loving trans people, Rowling is saying, I believe if we let trans women be recognised as real women, then this will affect cis women's ability to tell their stories. Which I don't know about you guys, but reads to me a lot like a straight couple saying, if gays are allowed to be married, then our marriage is meaningless. Which I think we could all agree is totally R-worded. It's not hate to speak the truth.
This is funny because I feel like this is exactly what racist people say when they try to explain to you, oh look, the bone structure of the African is different to the European.
And thus, the Caucasian is superior. Like, okay, sure, the skull shape is different, but that means nothing, and you're just an arsehole. Now, before we move on, let's assess another tweet. There are plenty of other questionable tweets, many which include microaggressions and reactionary content, so let's just stick to Rowling's so-called arguments. In another instance, Rowling tweets the following: "Dress however you please. Call yourself whatever you like. Sleep with any consenting adult who will have you. Live your best life in peace and security." Ironically, this is Rowling's attempt to explain that she is in fact not transphobic. Meanwhile, only that last part there was unproblematic. Now, I might be seen as nitpicking here, but let's look at how this subtextually reads. Play dress up all you like. Call yourself by a woman's name and use women's pronouns all you like. And if any man decides to sleep with you over a real woman for whatever reason, then congratulations, I guess. Rowling then goes on to say, but force women out of their jobs for stating sex is real? This is not contextually correct. The incident Rowling is referring to here is a case in which a woman was tweeting transphobic comments, and not subtle ones like Rowling, like non-subtle transphobic tweets on her public Twitter account, as well as refusing to use the pronouns of a trans employee at the company she worked for. The woman was not fired. Her contract was simply not renewed because the company believes that Maya, the woman in question's, views did not align with those of the company. I think this is totally reasonable. I believe in freedom of speech fundamentally, and in that, I believe in a company's freedom to choose who they want to represent their company. If a company's values don't align with the values of a representative who speaks publicly about their views on a social media platform that is linked to said company, then obviously they have every right to cease connections with that person. Some people seem to still be learning that what they put on the internet matters, and their actions, funnily enough, will have consequences. If you want to speak out against trans people publicly, on Twitter, on an account that has your place of business in your bio, you might want to consider whether or not that business would approve of the things you are saying. To summarize, Rowling says, trans women aren't real women, but to keep the peace, I will play into their delusion if it keeps them happy. But why should anyone be held accountable for their actions when they publicly spread bigotry? But let's move on. Chapter 2. LGBT fans fight back. Upon learning that Joanne not only hates trans people, but is willing to speak out against them, her fan base was sent into a frenzy. Here it was that Joanne forgot to read the room. She somehow forgot that Harry Potter was her most popular literary publication, a work of fiction that is primarily beloved by millennials and Gen Zers, a population who tend to be very progressive and liberal. Joanne seems to believe that her fan base are only those who love the Robert Galbraith books, Robert Galbraith being her pseudonym, which directly references known Nazi psychiatrist Robert Galbraith Heath. Funny that. The Galbraith books suck, according to everyone I know who has read any of them. And one of them even features a main villain who is a serial rapist trans woman or something, which is also very delightful. It's a shame Joanne is already a multimillionaire, because it would have been interesting to see how her livelihood fell apart due to the economic downfall of estranging herself from all the Harry Potter fans. Like, why do you think you have everything you have, Joanne? What an asshole thing to do to the fans. The people who bought your books and shot you into superstardom. You're just going to estrange yourself from them? Classy. So, what does this mean? Is it okay to still like Harry Potter if you don't like Joanne and no longer wish to support her? Listen, you have nothing to fear. All will be explained. Chapter 3. The Ern Malley Hoax. Let me take you on a little bit of a detour. Welcome to Adelaide, Australia. It's the early 1940s, and you're reading your favourite Australian literary journal, Angry Penguins. It's 1944, and you just encountered the biggest hoax in Australian literary history so far. Ern Malley. Ern Malley was an entirely fictional poet, invented by Australian poets James Macaulay and Harold Stewart. They decided to play a joke on the founder and co-editor of Angry Penguins magazine, Max Harris, by submitting poetry to the magazine under the fake name Ern Malley. The thing was, however, that this was all some kind of sick scheme. The men purposely made the poems as bad as possible so that, if it were so that Harris published the Malley poems, he would be outed as having no taste, knowing nothing about poetry, and being a phony critic who would publish any old garbage. Harris received the poems and loved them, even dedicating an issue of Angry Penguins to Malley, in which all of his poems were debuted. It seems as though Harris had fallen right into the trap. When Malley was exposed for being a fictional poet, Harris was sued on obscenity charges due to misleading the public. It was on his trial, in which Harris represented himself, that he famously stated that it didn't matter if Malley was real or not. Malley was real to me. If you want to read more about the case, I've linked some references in the description, including a couple of Ern Malley poems, which I think aren't even bad, they're actually quite good. You're probably wondering, what does this have to do with anything? Well, Harris's defense is what was later coined by literary critics W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe C. Beardsley as being the intentional fallacy. But what is the intentional fallacy? Chapter 4. The intentional fallacy. Wimsatt and Beardsley argued that it is not the author nor the critic that gets to decide the merit or meaning of a text. It is the public. It basically reinforces that beauty is indeed in the eye of the beholder, and that art is subjective, not objective. In essence, the Ern Malley hoax served as a political commentary on the intentional fallacy. The Malley case had Australia question the idea of what is good poetry. Although Macaulay and Stewart wrote the Malley poems intending to make them bad, it can be argued that their intentions mean nothing. This proposed many questions about how we see literary merit, and what we consider good poetry. Does it matter if Malley was fake, if what Harris saw in the poems was genuine? Wimsatt and Beardsley invite us to not take everything at face value, or accept what the writer believes the text means as gospel. Rather, we come to our own conclusions on what the literature we consume is worth. And thus, that brings us back to J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. Chapter 5. Rowling's Intentional Fallacy. I've had some messages, primarily on my TikTok, which you should definitely follow me on, from concerned Harry Potter fans who are also trans allies, who asked, is it okay to still like Harry Potter? The short answer to this is, of course. But why is it okay? Well, it all comes back to what Wimsatt and Beardsley said all those years ago. To put it simply, it does not matter what Rowling thinks, what she believes, her views or intentions. It doesn't matter what her motivations are. It didn't matter when she was physically writing the Harry Potter books, and it doesn't matter now. Harry Potter only represents what meaning the readers ascribe to it, and the common consensus seems to be that Harry and the gang say trans rights and Hogwarts is a safe place for all. Whether Rowling wants to believe it or not, that's just objectively true. Although, I kind of find it hard to believe that when Joanne was writing Harry Potter in the 90s for the first time, that she was thinking in the back of her mind, you know, this Harry character, he definitely hates trans people. But even if Rowling comes out sometime in the future and implies that in order to piss off the fan base she owes everything to, I encourage you to just spam her Twitter mentions with the Wikipedia page for the intentional fallacy theory. So, to summarize, yes, you are allowed to like Harry Potter, and financially supporting Rowling by buying the Harry Potter books or merch is not transphobic. Harry Potter is only ever what you believe it to be, and whether you like it or not, there is no room for TERFS at Hogwarts.